Hey, James, thank you for coming in and doing this interview and sharing your insights. You just have a marvelous career of accomplishment and contribution and scholarship and just execution in a global sense across so many dimensions. And that perspective will be really valuable to my audience. So thank you for coming in.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me as well. Looking forward to some good sharing and conversations.
So, James, what are two or three inflection points that really shaped who you are today? And it could have been when you were 2 or 3 years old. It could have been when you're five, inside, outside the family. It could have been inside, outside of schools. Could be mentors. It could have been challenges. For example, earlier today, I interviewed somebody who indicated they were in foster care, and that really shaped, their viewpoint in their life, and then especially about doing things that are really good for the broader community. And so it could be areas which were challenging in your life, but it could be opportunities as well. So if you can give me those three inflection points that were kind of magical for you.
Yeah, yeah. I think so, it's a funny thing when you ask that question because in some ways I feel like inflection points keep shifting as your life progresses. Because I believe I've shared this with you before, but now I'm realizing my answer is probably a little bit different. Uh, and I would say the first inflection point, specific moments in my life that tie back to really the core theme. Um, One was watching my mom uh, spend long hours preparing dinner. I still remember this very specifically in Singapore, where um, she had told over this dish. It's in a clay pot, and dinner was served. My dad was working very hard and was typically not home for dinner. And as she was carrying out from the kitchen, she dropped it. You know, and it was somewhat of a very devastating moment for her. She broke down and cried afterwards, and I think in that one moment, it captured the the toils of hard work, um, and sometimes coming up awfully short. And of course, it was picking up the pieces, cleaning up, and doing it all over again. But to me, that was one of the poignant moments that I remember because coupled with that was also how my father worked really hard for the family, making sure that we had enough money to put food on the table and put us in school. I still remember when I heard all those things and witnessed all those things. It it gave me the impetus and drive to continue to do what I do today, right? Which is it's not just about hard work, it's about solving the problems that are in front of you, right? When a meal gets broken, you have to redo it. You just redo it. Yes, it may feel terrible, but there's work ahead that still needs to be done because there are loved ones you need to care for, and so on. But I'd say that's one um, memory that I don't often recall a lot of things from my childhood, but that's definitely certainly one of them that I do. The second one would be, uh, and this will be my last one because this was a major inflection point. Was after being 15 years in the United States, I ended up in China for 13 years, and my original mission of going to China, I was sent over there on an expat basis, and was to oversee a group of 50, 60 engineers and try to understand how to eke out um, more productivity out of the team. And the notion back then, the common thinking back then was that although labor was generally cheaper in Asia, the subsequent productivity and output just didn't equal the Western counterparts. Then I learned within the 6 months that it wasn't necessarily about pay or education or backgrounds, upbringing, that people really needed to connect the dots between empowerment and accountability to the work that they did. If they understood what they were accountable for and they were given the ability to service that accountability through empowerment, powerful things can really happen. If someone didn't understand something because they didn't have the training, they'll actually make the effort to go figure out how to get that training and get that learnings in place. If someone wasn't, if there's no one taking over a particular task in the middle of the night, like for example, monitoring some online services, they'll actually figure out a way to put in the time to make that happen. And so long story short, after 13 years, I think the rest is history, right? Like you see that now the world's a very competitive place. There are strong talents everywhere. We're truly, truly global, and the AI race in front of us, between US and China is also unfolding in a way that's somewhat expected because everyone is very competitive, right? And competition is good.
And let me go back to, when you were younger and you shared this instance where this clay pot got broken and there was a sort of expectation of your mom and she felt this sort of disappointment at what happened, right? And that really had an impact on you. And she was such a hard worker and very diligent and resilient and then your dad, also worked very, very hard. And this is in Singapore, right? And
It was, yeah, correct.
And so those are memorable moments. And so in that crucible of where you see all of this hard work and sort of self-expectation, and then being resilient through those difficult times when there are difficult times. What led you to were you interested in tech at that time as well? And what was your reaction to your parents on technology and on academic performance? Was it sort of an Asian culture, and there's this kind of push to do well at school? Did you have that kind of thing, or was this, what was that atmosphere like when you were growing up?
Well, I went to school in Singapore. I was there for 10 years, and then international school in Bangkok, Thailand for 8. My family, I would say ethnically, were Chinese, right? My parents were born in Taiwan. So all of the typical things that you would expect from parents from that generation really hold true. Um, uh, when you score 99 out of 100 on a test, the comment isn't, "Oh wow, you did really well." It was, "Well, how come you didn't get 100?" All right, what happened to that one point that you missed? Um, and I mean, I do joke about it now with people within our company, that don't be satisfied with just being above average or being excellent, right? Be satisfied when you're at the top of the field. Um, I think there are different ways to look at it, but certainly the message is, don't rest on your laurels, keep going, right? Because you never know, the yardsticks will always shift, right? Like you look at this AI race, people go like, oh yeah, okay, we're leading, and before you know it, the goalpost has shifted, right? And then you have to keep pushing forward. Um, my parents, my mom specifically, uh, when I was young, she would take me, and this was in Singapore. She would take me to like this Lego exhibition that happened every year. I forget which shopping mall it was, but um, the highlight of that Lego exhibition is this uh, huge Lego sculpture of Death Star. So it's Death Star from Star Wars, and it has half of it is exposed, so you can see all the inner workings of what's going on, all the activities inside Death Star. And it was this massive thing that I told her I really wanted this Lego. So she said, you know what? If you get 100% on all your test scores for the next 6 months, I will buy this for you. Right? Those were her words. So I but if you don't do it, nothing is going to happen. You're not going to get anything. So believe it or not, Stephen, I went through 6 months and I scored 100 on every test up until the very last one.
Oh,
I still remember this one. I got a 19 out of 20. I missed one question, and it was a it wasn't a hard question. I just messed up, right? And I remember coming home and I showed her the test. She's like, "Oh," I think she had a sigh of relief because being a parent myself now, I know what happens when you make audacious promises that you know you can't keep because they don't sell that Lego set, right? It's not for sale. So she'd be like, "Oh, thank goodness!" Like he messed up. But for me, it was I was like, so what do I get instead of that? So she bought me like a small box set of Lego in place of the massive Death Star, right? Um, so all jokes aside, I think I still think about it very fondly, right, off the moment. But it's kind of like a battle wound, chip on my shoulder that hey, um, perfection is possible, right? Keep striving for it. If you don't make it, it's okay. It doesn't mean it's the end of the world, but you just keep trying.
it's kind of interesting, and I'm going to stay with your youth for a bit, but I'm just going to reflect on some experience I had in just some of the people that are colleagues within Google, and I get this sort of sense that they have this 10x mentality, and I'm
Mhm.
explaining what I mean by 10x mentality, and that is they look around and they look at their environment, they look at the tools and the operations they're doing, and then they ideate something that doesn't exist. So that's a 10x innovation that doesn't exist. The current tooling, the operating procedures, the workflow doesn't exist to support this 10x idea. And then I get the sense that then they're incentivized to actually go for it. And then that creates true growth innovation, right? And this 10x idea, right? Which seems impossible, but the thematic kind of process within Google is you never think of anything as impossible. So you think of these big ideas that the current system doesn't support, and then you go for it. And then by going for it, you iterate the necessary tooling and the operating systems and workflow and the necessary micro innovations to produce this 10x idea that seemed impossible. And this was shared publicly, when ChatGPT came out and Google was competing with them, and they came out with their version of Bard, and it made a mistake, and their stock took a
Yes,
big
yes.
hit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Internally, though, the team was not chastised for it. So
Mm,
internally, the team was celebrated for taking that 10x idea and going for it. Right.
mm,
So really having the willingness to think out of the box, and ultimately, because they did that, they led them to Gemini. And then, as you know,
hmm
Gemini last year in October, November, took over the leaderboards, and I actually overtook OpenAI. And that kind of changed the thinking of where Google was, not as a follower, but
Mm,
now as a leader. And then people are looking at their TPUs, and Anthropic is using their TPUs, and they're thinking, gee, maybe
mm,
this is a competitor even on the hardware side to
mm,
what NVIDIA has. So it kind of completely changed the mindset. So when I'm reflecting on, and the reason I mention this is because your mom's saying, okay, that's like a 10x idea, right? I
mm,
mean, she was thinking it's impossible, so I'm safe. It's a
mm.
safe zone. You're going to
Yeah,
strive for it, but it's a safe zone. And guess what? You could have done it. I mean, you came that close.
yeah. Came back close, exactly.
So it wasn't a defeat. It really
Mm,
was showing you that you can have this impossible 10x goal, and then you go for it. And even though you missed it by that much, you still did something that was really 10x, right? Or I had a chat with another gentleman where he was, he took on this challenge of being the top salesperson, and he told everybody he's going to be the top salesperson, and then he missed it. And then what he did is it just drove him harder to do it, and became the top salesperson in the entire country as a
mm,
student, right? So,
mm,
and it was such a 10x idea. So there you go. Your mom gave you
mm.
what I feel is kind of like a mantra now internally within Google, and that's why they're constantly innovating this 10x idea. So you in fact you nearly achieved it. So really, that nearly means you did achieve it, because it caused you to drive for these amazing goals. And even when you miss it, so what? Because you progressed in so many different dimensions and on that journey. Now, you indicated you were 10 years in Singapore, then you went into this international school. Why the shift to the international school?
Uh, Change of jobs. So my father was had worked for a Japanese construction firm in Singapore. Uh, in fact, helped build the Changi Airport, one of the most beautiful airports in the world, back in the 80s. And after that, he decided to take an opportunity to build golf courses in Thailand. So that took us to Thailand back in the early 80s. And that was a dramatic shift for me myself, because one, I was introduced to a regular diet of very spicy food, which is very painful. To heat and humidity. I mean, Singapore is also hot and humid, but Bangkok was certainly very underdeveloped, relatively speaking, to Singapore at that time, right? It's funny. I always count development by the number of McDonald's you can find in a city. And at that time, Bangkok had only one, right? It was right underneath Sogo, at the right next to the Erawan Shrine, that is very popular now. And certainly there are way more McDonald's than you can count. But that was kind of the landscape when I landed.
Yeah, and 7-Eleven stores, a lot of 7-Eleven stores. And
16,000, yes.
and you have sort of a close connection with those 7-Eleven stores in some way. We can get to that later for
Mm,
those through the audience. Okay, so you go to an international school, and because your dad got a new job opportunity. So is your dad like a construction engineer, or he's a developer then of some sort, or?
yeah, real estate developer, civil engineer by training. So golf courses, he helped build the first membership golf course in Bangkok, by the name of Pinehurst. And I don't know much about Pinehurst in Thailand today, but back then it was the sister country club to the Pinehurst that's in the United States. Yeah.
Well, so I can see now your engineering roots. Your dad was an engineer. He was trained as an engineer. And
Hmm.
so in
I had no
school,
choice.
yeah, now I can see the connection, right? So, but you did some schooling in the U.S. So how did that transition occur? So you did schooling in Singapore, you did schooling in
In
Thailand,
Thailand.
and
Yeah,
you
went to
must
the
have
United
got,
States for university.
yeah, but your grades in that must have been pretty good, right? And you did go through a 6-month period. You got 100%, and you just missed by when Mark.
Yeah, I did okay. I did okay.
Okay, so
Um,
okay,
no, go
so
ahead. Go ahead.
tell me, why not go to school in Singapore? Why not go to school in the ASEAN region? Why go to school in the U.S.? It's because of kind of the nature of U.S., the land of opportunity, the what
Mm,
caused you to seek out the
yeah.
U.S.?
Uh, Interesting. It's interesting because nobody has asked me that question before. Um, when I graduated, there was generally two trends. One was to stay in Thailand and go to one of the universities in Thailand, and the second one was to go overseas. Now, if you went overseas, predominantly the choice is going to be the United States. And keep in mind, at that point, I've never been to the US. Never,
Right.
right? So I have like, yeah, it's just, and it's amazing that I ended up choosing, we chose that as the place to destination. Part of it is my parents firmly believe that I should go to the US. So in many ways, it wasn't really a choice, you know, but I was kind of coaxed in that direction. I didn't have a strong opinion about where I should go. In fact, I had applied to many universities um, and done the standard thing, right? You go by the U.S. News, and I don't even remember that publication. Or you look at the top 10, and you go like, okay, top 10 schools. I'm going to apply to this one, this one, this one, this one, and then do all your essays, and then see what happens. Right. So yes, Cornell was in there, Dartmouth, Carnegie Mellon, and all these other schools. And I remember um, uh, I and I spent time reviewing the school list with my dad, and he had agreed to all these school choices as well. Um, and then one day he came back and he said, "Hey, how about you consider going to Georgia Institute of Technology?"
Yeah, it's a good
And
school. So
I looked at him and I said, what is that school? I have no idea what that school was. So he pulls out the magazine. He goes down the oh, it's not on the first page, because first page is like your top general all-purpose schools, right?
right.
It's like, oh, you have to go into like the electrical engineering, and under electrical engineering, you can see like, oh, they're like number I think they were in the top 10 at that time. I don't remember it was like top five or top 10. And it's like, but this wasn't what we had discussed previously, right? And he's like, no, my friend said that's a good school, and
Yeah.
then later I found out it's because the tuition was much more affordable. I
Yeah.
think even as out of state, it was like with room and board, it was $6,000 a quarter, so $24,000 a year, right? And you compare that at that time to like a CMU was 50 grand. So 4 years, 50 grand, you're 200 grand in versus 4 years, 26 grand, you're a little bit over $100,000. So, um, but you know, I think, the, so in the end, the experience was great. But it also told me that it's actually doesn't really matter. Yes, it kind of matters where you go to an extent, but more importantly, is what you do there that truly matters. Right? Because if you go to a prestigious school and you kind of waltz your way through it, don't build relationships, don't reflect on your time there. You may not get as much out of that experience as you would have had you taken some of those hard lessons or really push the envelope, right, of failing fast. So,
So
anyways,
let's
that's my journey to US.
let's reflect on this further. And by the way, I'm just going from memory, but I remember reading a Google study, and then I encourage people to use their AI agents to take a look and get the real facts. But this is sort of my impression of what I
Mm,
read a number of years ago, where they actually looked at the performance of their employees and whether they graduated from an MIT or Harvard or even didn't graduate. Sorry, I didn't understand. From one of the universities. They found, I believe they found that after a few years, it didn't matter. It was really It gave him an advantage for the first, several years, and then after that, it didn't matter. But what then
Mm,
determined what would be a good employees is just hard work and diligence and
mm.
drive and things like that. And that education aspect just basically disappeared after the first few
Well,
years.
I can tell you, yeah, I can tell you that that was certainly true even when I was working at Dell. Um, and, it's not anything against the schools. It's just like after you've worked at a place for 3, 4 years, and then someone tells you, "Oh yeah, I went to MIT." Like it at that point in time, 4 years into the job, it almost doesn't matter because what matters was like what was going on like right then and there. How are we gonna complete this project, right? Like you being from MIT or from Harvard, if that's gonna get us to the final answer tomorrow, that's great.
Right. Okay, so you grew up in Singapore. You go to the international school. Your dad's a civil engineer. He's also a commercial developer. I could see the engineering roots. You got your mother's sort of ethos of hard work and education and things together with your dad. Your mother putting out these kind of 10x ideas, and you're actually going for it.
Mm.
And but English, what did you speak English? Well,
I learned my English watching Rambo, Sylvester Stallone, and that and Rocky. Yeah, no, I, yeah, I don't really understand it myself. I think I watched a lot of American movies growing up in Thailand. Going to the video rental stores, and then I would just rewatch these films over and over again. The international school I went to didn't necessarily get people to speak English in a particular accent. But I do remember going to school in the US. People would get really confused because I would be there like my first month in the US, be like, "Oh yeah, where are you from? Are you from New York? No, 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 no. You must be from." I was like, "No, no, no. I'm not from any of those places. I'm from
right.
Bangkok, Thailand." And at that point, they would be completely floored, right? Because they're like, "But you speak English really well."
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I have no idea, so it is what it is.
Yeah, and in fact, I've interviewed other people who have just brilliant people who got their base education in Thailand, and then they try to get into a U.S. school, and they wouldn't be accepted. So for
Mm.
you to get accepted, and Georgia Tech is a really good school. So,
Yeah, it's the what MIT is the Georgia Tech of the North, right?
yeah, yeah,
Something like that. Yeah. It's a very
yeah. I
tough
mean,
school, that's for sure.
yeah. So what was that like then in your first year? Was it a shock because you got some of the best people in the world going to Georgia Tech, and you're performing really well in Thailand, and then was it kind of an upscaling required because now you're at a global top ranked institution, right? Did you have to
Yeah.
adjust, or because you had worked so hard and you prepped so hard that you just naturally flowed into Georgia Tech?
Actually, I my schooling, I would say my final 2 years in high school, it wasn't heavily focused on academia. Um, because I was involved in so many extracurricular stuff in school. And so much so that in my senior year, I barely got enough sleep because I just could not finish homework in time. I could not study for tests in time. I did not get, a 4.0 GPA. When I did my APs, I got the highest AP scores I got were like a 4. I think maybe I had a 5 somewhere in there. Um, and I didn't take that many APs. Back then APs wasn't also that common in Thailand. Uh, so I didn't get. I think I did the calculus AP and a physics AP. And I'm mentioning these points because when I went to school my first month at Georgia Tech, you roam around the dorms, right? Like on your floor. and people were kind of telling their backgrounds, like, oh yeah, what was your GPA? It's like, oh yeah, my GPA was 5.0. How do you get a 5.0 GPA? Like that was foreign to me, right? It's like, oh yeah, because I took like these like university level courses at my high school.
Right.
And I scored, and they would score fives on all these things that I had struggled with, So I was
Right.
like, oh wow, I'm gonna be in trouble. But Stephen, the I don't know why, and I can't really pinpoint specifically what it was in the education learning process, but I can certainly tell you that I I had less trouble learning in class in university than my counterparts.
That's
Like for me, and it was a very surprising thing for me because I learned that purely being a good test taker, or anticipating the types of questions that you're getting asked and then answering them well was not sufficient. It can only carry you so far, but to get to the next block, you need to have some level of creativity in your thinking, to be able to understand new concepts,
right.
right? And then I felt like there was a clear separation that was happening between the student population within the first 12 months in school. There's those that were going to make it and those that were not going to make it, right? So I would say that, um, uh, I don't know. Maybe I need to think deeper about my growing up process, but doing the extracurricular stuff, and not focusing too much solely on academia certainly could have been a factor.
And let's build some context for the audience again. For those who haven't studied engineering, and this is just my opinion. In my opinion, the two
Mm,
most difficult engineering disciplines are engineering physics. And typically, if you do engineering physics, you go into some kind of research or something. And the second one that's kind of on par is electrical engineering because there's just so much math in it, right? So really, those are the two most difficult engineering disciplines. So you choose electrical engineering, and of all of the engineering disciplines, it's the hardest. It's very competitive. It's not like it's kind of like computing science in a sense, right?
mm,
There's
mm.
so much math and stuff in there. And so you get a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from Georgia Tech, a top institution, and as you indicate, and English is not your native language. so
Right.
so that's and yet you took to it and you found it like I could do this, right? And that whole process of you getting a bachelor's, and then what happened after that?
Um, Crossroads, right? So in my final year, of university, I was uh I really wanted to stay in the United States after I graduated. And as an international student, you're on an F1 visa. In order to stay in country, there's a OPT, which is I think it's optional training, uh for 1 year. You can do OPT training for 1 year, and then after that, if you don't land a permanent job, you have to leave. Or if you continue to higher ed after that, like a master's degree, then you continue your F1 visa. Um, so in my final year, I was at those crossroads, right? Should I go back to Asia afterwards or find a way to stay? Um, I My grades at that point were not good enough to qualify for a master's degree scholarship yet. Um, and I had there was no pathway to that either. I didn't know any professor and whatnot, but something magical was happening at that point in time. The World Wide Web had just been born, and Oracle or Sun Microsystems, I don't remember which one now. I think it was Sun Micro. They had just come out with the Java libraries, right? So there's this concept of runtime program application execution on the web. Um, and then a lot of professors were starting to tinker around with how to get interactivity into their classrooms. Um, I had picked up Java, 101 in class, and then I started to uh, take on a part-time gig, writing web applications, basically custom write web applications for professors to augment their classrooms, right? So they'll tell me like conceptually what they want, they'll draw the pictures, and then I'll go, oh yeah, okay, I can code that, right? So I built up all these like libraries for me to do that quickly, and long story short, I ended up doing a lot of work for one specific professor, and she offered me the opportunity to take on a full scholarship for a master's degree with her in electrical engineering, including stipend, um, which is amazing. But she said on one condition, you have to get a 3.5 GPA overall in order to qualify. And I was at that point to get to 3.5, I have to score perfect on my final two quarters at Georgia Tech, which has never happened before up to that point.
Right.
So again, it's funny like how life kind of cycles itself, right? It's two
It's your
quarters, six
mother's,
months.
it's your mother. Yeah, your mother's.
And it was some of the toughest classes that I had to do this in, right? And I made it. So I actually scored perfect for two quarters, got myself above the qualifying mark, and got the scholarship, and then did my job interview at Dell, and then opted to take the job instead of the master's degree.
That's
And
interesting.
my dad was furious.
Yeah, I could see that because and you earned it. You earned in the history of Georgia Tech to have two quarters, perfect hard courses,
Yeah, yeah,
and you had a stipend, and you got your master, and it was on full scholarship.
yes, yes,
That was
yeah.
that professor. Is she still a friend, or do you know her?
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I was just talking to her a few years before COVID. She was setting up Georgia Tech in Shenzhen.
I see.
Yes, yes, and we had chatted briefly. She was kind of updating me. She remembers me very well. We actually co-authored papers together while I was at Georgia Tech. So I'll send you a few of those papers afterwards.
Can you put links? Can you redo your profile? I don't know if you sent Evelyn your profile.
I'm not sure either.
Okay, so
I'll look into
oh,
it.
yeah, so put links in your profile, put links to Lumate, anything,
Yeah.
Cloud 11, put everything into your profile, right? And make it really, really long. So that's really fascinating that
Mm.
you could have got a full ride master's. And then I could see why your dad would think, James.
I mean, even you're shaking your head, Stephen.
But Dell is no slouch either, though, right? So so okay. So why did you take the job with Dell?
I was economically driven, right? So I think to be honest, Stephen, if you couldn't tell already, I was never a big fan of schooling.
Yeah,
Um, I don't, I don't like, I don't like taking tests. I don't like doing homework. Um, but it doesn't mean that I don't try to do well. I just didn't quite enjoy it as much as some people do. Like I know some of the folks that you've introduced me to, they're going after like second, third, fourth, fifth degrees. It's amazing, right? But I just don't. I maybe like to sit in class, but I don't like taking tests. I don't like having to study for them.
I think you're
So that
thinking
really,
Fernando Garibay. I think he's now going for three
yeah,
PhDs.
yes, yes, yeah.
Nice.
He's like the Chicago Bulls, right? Going for I don't know, three peat, five peats. So for me, like just getting out of that cycle and going into the workplace was extremely exciting. But again, this is like I had no idea what was in store for me because I've never worked professionally at a US corporate. I've done internships in Thailand, but I've never done like full on, US corporate work. So I also, wasn't quite sure what was going to happen, but I was excited of that, highly anticipating what was going to be happening down the road.
Okay, now before we continue, I'm just going to do a time check because I love for this interview to go over an hour, but I don't know if you have a
Sure.
hard stop. Okay, okay, we can go over an hour. Okay, that's great because it allows me to kind of drill and
Mm.
go further. So that's really interesting. So you put an application and then into Dell, and then you do an interview. What was that process like? And and
Oh, it was Fast and Furious. I mean, um, that Adele had a huge impact on how I viewed workplace because they were highly efficient in the recruiting process. Um, they were very professional. They had an extremely strong human resources team. I know that now because I actually built up human resource capabilities in China, and a lot of what I did there was modeled after what I experienced when I joined Adele. I'm somewhat observant, so when I see things operationally that I think are excellent, I remember them, and then I think about how to do the same thing, and I realize that it's actually a lot of work, to get it to that level. But Dell is hyper efficient, and then once you get into the company, you realize that it's in the DNA because they were doing that very same thing on supply chain,
so
right? And then and how they're building computers.
how big were they at that time?
40,000, roughly 40,000 people.
So already pretty big, right?
Oh yeah, they
And
were top three PC manufacturer at that time already.
so in that interview process, though, there, you hear different stories of different companies. Some of them challenge you with problems, others don't. I mean, what was that process like? Did they give you problems to solve, or did they ask you questions that were not traditional questions, or so you said it was very professional. Why would you say that? Well, and you said you modeled it. So what were the things that you thought were really interesting in that process?
I interviewed with a lot of companies at that time, Motorola, Lucent Technologies, Alcatel, Mitsubishi, like wide spectrum. And Dell was the only one that kept all the interviews on time
Oh, I see.
and got back promptly. So
Right.
they would say like, "Oh, we will get back to you with a response by this date," and they would actually do that. And we will tell you if it's a yes or no by this date, and you'll get an offer letter on this date. Like they were very methodical
Right.
methodical and precise, right? In the execution.
Right.
Um, and so for me, it was a relatively easy position to take because I think all of those places that I mentioned were interesting, but this was one where right out the gate, like the experience of a recruit, the experience that they gave a recruit was I felt was excellent. They treated you with not only respect, but respect with your time
Right.
and setting your expectations appropriately, right? And these are the things that actually in China we did the same thing. I had this mantra that I told my HR team that by when the person comes in for an interview on a Monday, I want to make sure that our process is such that they will get an offer of yes or no by Friday, by end of week.
Right.
So 5 working days. Because that experience is very important. And when they come in, you make sure you give them bottled water, you put them in a very nice room, give them the best view of the house, because that's how we want to treat them. And I felt I received that going through the interview process. As far as the
Right.
questions goes, there wasn't anything that I recall, but I know that the hiring manager that I interviewed with ended up not being my hiring manager. That was my first instance of mega company having continual reorg changes and then people getting shifted around all the time.
what's interesting though is what you're describing is you were treated as a special guest.
Mhm.
So it wasn't like you're a plebe or something. You know what I mean? They treated you with respect and as a guest.
Mhm.
And they made that experience as, we are honored to have you here, that you took the time to apply to us. And we're going to treat you with care through this process because you're an honored guest in our home, basically, right? So that's a really interesting reflection. And then what was it like then your first day on the job, and then how did that progress? The different kind of positions you had, and how did that progress over time?
Um, first 2 weeks was all onboarding orientation, which was again very meticulously planned, well thought out, um, and it was a great introduction to the company. Um, I would say my journey at Dell, I would encapsulate it as um, I had many good managers that gave me I would say lessons learned that I still utilize today. Um, some really excellent people, and the strive for excellence, the culture was very strong in that regard, and very much so in the supply chain procurement department, which is what something that Dell is probably still today very excellent in. And they're also very keen on the voice of the customer, which is understanding where the customer is coming from. So of course, in today's age of social media and social commerce and everything else, where we're trying to pay attention, like, listening to what consumers are looking for. Back then, even with not as advanced of the technologies that we have today, those already very much into making sure you're connected with that. So I think I know that that was not typical for many corporations. Maybe part of the reason why Dell's still around today. Um, and yeah, I really took those lessons to heart, and everything that I do at the moment.
So, in your first tasks that you were given, though, it sounds like you didn't use then your electrical engineering background and your coding, Java kind of, side plays that you were doing and things like that.
Yeah, I did so I didn't tell you this part, but I didn't choose electrical engineering. My dad chose it for me.
Oh, I see.
Um yeah, yeah. And he chose electrical engineering because in Taiwan, where he went to university, you have to do the entrance exam, and if you get the top score, you were placed into electrical engineering.
Right,
If you get the second top score, I think it's mechanical and civil.
right.
I think he was a mechanic. Actually, I don't remember which one he was now, but anyways, he was the one that was second to the top. And so when you have a choice to choose, like, well, you definitely have to do electrical engineering, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's and it applies to everything. Right.
yeah, and I did not enjoy it actually. I don't like calculating imaginary numbers, which is one of the hardest parts of electrical engineering because you're dealing with stuff that you can't really see, you know. Um, but that aside, the most interesting classes I took, which then later I applied on the job, was actually this digital signal processing. So this was the at that stage we were already doing matrix compute, which is the genesis of, as you know today, the modern GPU, right? And all the things that we that first it was crypto, and then later became AI, or LLMs in general. But it's something that both ATI back then and NVIDIA was already very good at. Um, but I carried those experiences to work at Dell, because at Dell I was working on storage technologies, and storage technologies had essentially quite a bit of math behind the scenes, right? To ensure that as you're writing data, digital data into a physical medium, there's a lot of error corrections involved and so on and so forth. So how do you make sure that those things are are robust and then can survive the processes of shipping and manufacturing and then installation at Dell, and then later end up in the consumer's hands and how they want to use the product. Right. So it's spending a lot of time on those things.
So, did you get into a lot of embedded kind of work and embedded microcode kind of stuff, or
Yeah, did a lot of um, machine language,
right?
assembly language, quite low level. I mean, nothing supremely complicated, Stephen. I think all those are just trying to manipulate um, something to work in a way that consumers understand,
Right.
but and then sometimes you're dealing with impossible issues that are still mind-boggling to me today that they happen in a production environment. But that's the amazing thing about where we are today. The technology stack is so robust. Um, I still remember the day when Intel launched like their Pentium processors, and this, I don't know how many years back this was, but there was a problem with uh, floating point calculations in Excel. I don't remember this one, Stephen. Right? And then we think of that back then, it's like that would be impossible today. But back then that was really happening. So it tells you like where there's so much complexity that goes into everything that we do. We almost take it for granted. The layers of technology that have been built up to enable the next level of tech to happen. Right? Next level application. So I was kind of dealing in that low level for a little bit, but because of that, it gives me that deep appreciation of how hard it is to do something. But you always have to start from basics, right? If you understand the ones and zeros, and then start layering it up, then you can apply this kind of thinking to any business problem, because oftentimes if people don't understand how the sausage is made, uh, then they won't have full appreciation on how to talk to the people who are making that sausage. Right? How do you get on the
So,
same talking plane?
so you're really working at a fundamental hardware
Mhm.
coding, assembler, machine language level. How long did you do that, and then how did you transition from there into other roles?
I wasn't doing that for that long. I'd say maybe a year or two. Um, but we were reorganized into um, to be more procurement focused. So our engineering really was to ensure that we had a robust supply chain, which is effectively is a business problem
Right.
to solve for. Um, and then took me, to work with suppliers and partners in both Korea, Japan, and then later on Taiwan. So you could actually see at that point in time, the supply chain was already shifting, right? So I started in Japan, then went to Korea, and then went to Taiwan. And then when I left Dell, I was already going from Taiwan to China. That
So,
was the progression.
so why did you leave Dell?
Um, Crossroads, another set of crossroads. I was tasked to set up uh, our team in Singapore. And at that point, I had a choice to after completing that setup and migration, I had a choice to take on another role at Dell. And then subsequently, I decided to move on to jump into the software industry with one of the partners that we had worked closely with when I was at my time at Dell. The company at that time was called Roxio. They made recording software for CDs and DVDs. Um, we don't talk about it anymore because CDs and DVDs don't exist.
Right.
Um, but back then it was very cool that you could make your own, mixed audio CD. And uh, yeah, it was just 50,000 person company down to a company that was 600 people. It was a big shift, and out of California of all places.
Okay, so that's a really big shift. And what was your role there in this company?
I was is a good question. I found out that when you go to a small company, your roles shift quite a bit every few months. Doesn't happen in big corporate, but in small ones they do. Um, and the timing was pretty poor on my part because I had to make that shift right on the heels of 2008, right before the financial crisis.
Right, right,
So I remember I spent about 6 months working on standardization because on the software side, you're writing software to interface with hardware, and they were participating in many standards forums. So I was in many of those standard bodies, right, participating and contributing to specifications on how to communicate between software and hardware. And within hardware, like the different layers of hardware, and then how to optimize for those. It's kind of geeky, boring stuff, in my opinion, but it's just things that I understood well how to do, and I did it. It wasn't particularly fun, but it's a good learning process. And I think the best part about that is that you get to work with different industry titans that are
right.
trying to do the same thing, like Microsoft, Philips, Sony, Panasonic, and so on and so forth. So it was great to see a lot of familiar faces that I had worked with in the past, working together in a different way. Um, so I did that for about 6 months. Then the financial crisis hit, and then it was at that point I experienced a change in management every 6 to 8 weeks because my manager at the time would be laid off, and then the new person would take over, and then that person would get laid off, new person would take over again. So I was kind of in limbo for a while. Um, until I worked for a gentleman by the name of Pete Bowden, who's still in California. And 3 months into the job with him, he sent me to China.
Okay, so now describe that China journey.
Mhm. Yeah, I was never meant to be a long-term one. Um, I was supposed to be there for 60 days, uh, doing two parts. One, help them do recruiting, go from like 60 engineers to 100 people. And then the second one was to figure out why the productivity was so poor at that time. And my journey there in the beginning was going to the office every day, and then watching the lights go off at 5 p.m. because people would head home. And that was a bit odd to me because I would contrast that to what I was seeing on the streets, and people were hustling. 6 a.m. Shanghai is already awake, and people are still working at 6 p.m. Other offices were brightly lit, so I wasn't quite sure what was going on. Uh, but in that particular instance, it's where I learned the lesson of, as I mentioned earlier in the call, accountability and empowerment. What I learned was, in a very simple way, was the engineers, when they started their day, they received instructions overnight from their counterparts. If they didn't understand those instructions, they will try to contact their counterparts to get a clarification. If they didn't get the clarification, they were just stuck for the entire day. They had nothing to do. And then at the end of the day, they would just go home because what else could they do? Very simple thing. So we made some adjustments, and we streamlined the way the teams are communicating, and now put more onus on the team in China. And before you know it, they weren't turning off lights at 5 p.m. Right? Because now when they're getting stuck, they knew how to unblock themselves and keep going. Right? And became like 6 p.m., 7 p.m. And then when you layer in the part about accountability and empowerment, accountability means that the buck stops with you. If there's a problem, guess what? No one else is going to solve it but yourself. Um, then they're they will pull anyone around the world, right, will burn the midnight oil candle and toil through and make sure that the problem gets solved. I think that's an innate human nature when you know that you are responsible for this thing working properly.
So, and you spent how much time at that company? And again, the name of the company again, just to,
Um, at that point, the company also went through multiple M&As. I'm trying to remember which name it was by the time it was all said and done. So it was Roxio. Roxio got acquired by Sonic Solutions. Sonic Solutions got acquired by Rovi. Rovi, which is Macrovision, and became Rovi. And so by the time my third year in China, I was under Rovi already. And at that point, Rovi decided to sell our division that we're working under, which is doing content streaming. And keep in mind, this is content streaming during the days of when BlackBerry was still the predominant device in hand, which means that it was extremely difficult thing to do. And that's when I made my jump into banking and fintech. So I partnered up with a company called Green Dot, based out of Pasadena, California, and they wanted to consolidate all of their engineering resources outside the United States into Shanghai, China. So at that point they had resource centers in India, multiple locations in India, and a few other locations that I don't recall at the moment. But they wanted to just consolidate everything in Shanghai, China. And they were looking for someone to help them do that. And that's when I stepped into that role. So I was essentially almost employee number one, and this is 2013, end of 2013, and then helped them build a site up. Our goal was to be the world-class technology hub for that any company would be proud of. And at its height, we're at 600 people, which looking back, very proud of the people that work there. I still talk to them today.
and again, just as a reminder, what would then be the focus of Green Dot Corporation?
Green Dot is from a consumer perspective is a prepaid card company that services the low to mid class Americans, the population, and they provide affordable banking to the masses. Right, so you can get a bank account without going to a bank. You can go to at the checkout counter, pick up one of the prepaid cards, and then load money into the card, and you have a bank account. And now you also have a Visa card that you can swipe, right, in any location. And this is highly empowering because for people that live paycheck to paycheck, get paid in cash, you often have to go to like a paycheck clearing place, which you have to drive to, pay a hefty fee to cash a check on the spot, right? And then be able to then use that cash for something else versus going to like a Walmart or Rite Aid and being able to do that transaction as you're picking up groceries to put food on the table the next morning, right, based on your daily wages. So I think Green Dot really focused on solving one of the biggest pain points for those that were disadvantaged in the economy.
Okay, so describe the different kind of your sort of start with Green Dot, because it was almost like employee number one to when you eventually think about exiting. What's that journey like?
You mean leaving Green Dot, right?
Yeah, leaving Green Dot.
Okay. Okay. So,
I mean,
yeah,
you're a senior vice president at Green Dot, right? You have a pretty senior role or something like that, and
yeah. The Green Dot journey was quite uh colorful one.
Colorful, right?
Yeah. I think there's just so much going on, packed into one thing, right? For one, it was trying to attempting to do something world class at a time when uh, it was not viewed as feasible to do so. But we succeeded, right? And extremely strong talent across the board. Um, and then we ran into COVID. And COVID in China, we'll leave that aside. But during that time, Green Dot also saw uh, changes in the leadership. We had a new CEO come in, and uh, I was during the period of COVID where travel was not permitted, right? I was uh, essentially the company readjusted its priorities and gave me the responsibility to manage almost half of the company's population globally. Right. So at one point in time, I had 600 people that I had to take care of. 400 in China, another 200 in the US, and we couldn't travel. Right. So it was the first time ever in my life that I really took advantage of having a personal assistant, because before then I was kind of doing everything myself. But now I had to have someone help me with my scheduling, because I was literally back to back 4:30, 5 a.m. all the way till 1 a.m. in the morning every day. Um, and it was extremely exhausting and painful, and I did that for about 6 months. Impacted my health, as you can imagine. Everything, right? Like mentally is mentally exhausting. Um, so went through that period, and Green Dot underwent a lot of changes. But for us as a family, um, we after going through that COVID period, I think we felt like our time was up in China. So I started looking for opportunities outside of China as well. Um, and we were quite open about where we would go, right? I mean, going back to the US, or go to Singapore, or maybe even Thailand. And that's where I encountered I was connected to um, uh, contacts at the CP Group out of Thailand, and had multiple month conversations, maybe 6 to 8 months, and that brought me to Thailand eventually at the end of 2023.
So can you describe some of the sort of conversations of who you were having within the CP group, and then how you transitioned into Kumbi and DTGO and KBDC, and then
Yeah,
so we'll map that whole journey out, and then we'll finally get to
yeah,
the
yeah,
end.
yeah. So with CP, it was um, I met with a gentleman by the name of Alex, or Kun Alex. Uh, he is like the chairperson on multiple boards within the CP group, and part of the family as well. Um, Always very generous of his time, and getting to spend even more time with him now over the years. Uh, Extremely charismatic as in the entire family, and very practical, um, and likes to push the envelope, right, in terms of performance. So my conversations with him uh, was one I would characterize as he would throw challenges at me all the time. Hey, I have this problem. It would be some crazy massive problem uh, or I shouldn't say problem, challenge that they were having in their group. And clearly, I have no experience or expertise to go service that. but I'll actually try to think of ways on how to work in that problem. Um, uh, and I didn't have AI at the time, by the way. So there's no like, open AI or like it just wasn't part of the process. And went did that for a few months, and eventually he said, okay, you know what? I think it's probably good for you to meet with more CP leadership to see if there's a fit there. So I actually went to CP Beijing to meet with the leadership there. Then decided, okay, we should leave China and go somewhere else. So I told Alex, hey, is there something in Thailand that I could possibly do? So he arranged this huge consortium meeting where I sat in front of like 15 people at the True Tower in Bangkok. So these are executives from different parts of CP, and and then I remember in that cohort there was a very nice lady that came in, and she sat down. She had a mask on, so I didn't know who she was. I got her name card, and it just said, Tipaporn. Um, and I was like, okay. So I sat down, and she was quiet the entire time. And then towards the end, she started asking me questions, right? And she asked me, oh, so what do you think of crypto? What do you think of blockchain? What do you think of the metaverse? And I was pretty negative on all those things. Yeah. You know the background, so it's definitely very funny. Um, uh, and so that was that. But then I ended up so then I learned Miss Tipperporn or Quintipaporn uh, was the youngest daughter in the family, and Alex's youngest sister. And uh, so we had a few more conversations with her afterwards. Um, then she got very busy with many of the metaverse launch projects. But we reconnected again at the end of June, early July, when she needed help. She asked me if I could help her with consolidating the efforts on the metaverse um, across all the various groups that she was involved with. And uh, I told her I still wasn't a firm believer in the metaverse, but I'm happy to, from a tech perspective, I'm happy to help her do it because for me, tech is tech. The business problem is I was so naive, Stephen, right? Business problem is okay, business problem is business problem. We can figure that out later. So I came to Thailand on that premise, really to partner with her, and um, both her and her husband, Dr. Dan, were very gracious, and truly made it a partnership, right? It wasn't like a boss employee relationship. It was like, hey, come help us. Let's work at this together. Right? Let's try to solve this together. So that's my journey. Officially made the move to Thailand in August, and then I started my job on October 2nd, 2023.
And your position was what?
Um, Group CEO for the Metaverse Group, which we're no longer called that, but that was the position at that time. Titles, I'm not a big fan of titles, Stephen. They're they're easy to kind of explain where you are in the hierarchy system, but uh, for me, the outcomes that you have to be responsible for are more important, right? So I always try to focus on that.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of excitement with the metaverse and especially with Meta. Even Facebook changed the
Mm,
name to Meta and sort of
yep.
recognition of that. And then this thing called ChatGPT came out and it's kind of upended that whole momentum in that direction, though Meta still continued with things like their glasses, right? And they
Hmm.
still have their VR gear, but the glasses have taken off. And Apple, of course, has worked on their Pro Vision. They're still maintaining some, but look, it
Hmm.
sounds like they're working on some kind of glasses as well. And Google
Yeah.
seems like it's similar, though they earlier tried that. So this idea of metaverse has transitioned into more, the different kinds of realities that are out there, extended reality, augmented reality, and is there persistence in that in some way, and
And
being overlaid in glasses or other kind of media. Um, so what are your views on that transition? I mean, do you believe that that journey is going to continue? It's just going to be, it becomes more seamless, right? If you have regular kind of glasses, now it looks like they'll go to prescription glasses and you can miniaturize
yeah,
things in them. And
I actually don't know, Steven. I think metaverse was way ahead of its time, and you can tell because, like, when you think about the big topics of today, people don't really struggle. People don't struggle at all explaining what LLMs are, what agentic AI is, or what even trying to define AGI, right? I think you and I talked about that a year ago. I mean, yes, there's some differences of opinion what that is, but it's mostly confined within a set uh, of boundaries. But when you talk about metaverse, like the definition of metaverse is so broad. Like people are like, oh, metaverse, you have to have a haptic suit, you have to feel it physically, just like Ready Player One movie. Other people would say, oh, it's just a virtual version, like a digital twin of something. Like there's all these like huge spectrums of definition. And I would say that it's probably because the product market fit is just not clear. Um, there is this embodiment of, oh yeah, we could do things virtually because we're all confined in our homes, and that was a pain point. But that pain point went away the moment everything started unlocking, right? So
right, opening up.
so yeah, so I feel like it became a solution struggling to find a problem.
But
Um,
it's embedded though. It's like before
mm.
we started recording, you kind of joked, should I put my avatar up or because now because that's a reality, right? You can have a digital representation,
Sure.
or you can
Yeah.
have these things that overlay you. Really, that is part of this older term called metaverse, but it's embedded
Yeah.
in different ways, right? So
Yeah, and so that it's a good point, Stephen. And I think that comes where comes the rub is it depends on who you're talking to, how they define the metaverse. Because for some people, uh, maybe having an avatar in a 2D like a screen is okay. That's you're already in VR. Other people, you have to literally be in VR with the full VR headset, right? For some people, it's augmented reality. But at the end of the day, it's so our approach right now, as I had worked with our founders, is to say, look, um, nobody's discounting that metaverse is not going to happen. We still have yet to fully define it, but let's just hypothetically say it's the virtual reality, and you get to do things in the virtual space, just like you would in physical, but your imagination can completely take over, and you can let's just say you can do infinite number of things, anything you want. Let's just say that that's the future. Then let's take it from a first principles perspective and say that okay, what are all the things that need to happen in order for that future reality to take shape, right? What are all the technologies that are involved, the techniques, the know-how that we need to have in order to be able to do this successfully? Because clearly, just having a ton of capital like Meta did doesn't doesn't is not enough, right? You so capital is only part of the equation, very important part, but it's not the only piece that you need to have. Um, so for the way I look at it is you need to master all the technologies that are crucial in enabling that type of world to exist. Virtual reality, augmented reality, blockchain, if you're looking at decentralized way of running your systems. Um, AI, for everything from ideation, creativity, down to execution, um, and more, right? There's like spatial computing, lots of different theories on how to run the game engines to enable large number of people in a single space. Like there's so many engineering and physics problems to solve. And that's only part of it, right? The other part of it is, well, what about the product market fit? How do you find the angle for corporations to or business or brands to participate in this in a way that's accretive to their core business? All right, because people still need to make that jump into the space. And then how do you get consumers into the space? Because if the prerequisite is that everyone has one of these glasses, headsets, whatever you call them, then the price points of the glasses have to come down to a certain price point, and the quality of the experience that those glasses delivers at that price point needs to be at the place that's sufficient to achieve the results that you want, the experience that you want them to have, right? So everything I described to you in the last 5 minutes is only just a very high level summation of the complexity of what needs to be achieved. Um, and so for us, I feel like we're still at the very infancy of our journey, and that's part of the reason why we were focusing on the things that we are focusing on now, with Luminate, which I know we'll talk about in a bit.
Okay, so you're talking about this transition then of, digital twins and avatars and extended reality, augmented reality into Illuminate. And so what is Illuminate?
Yeah, so Luminate, first and foremost, for most people, right? Luminate is, when we speak externally to our partners, Luminate is a uh, accelerator for businesses to quickly get into a market within Thailand and Southeast Asia, in a broader sense. We work with technology companies, consumer product companies, services, physical products, and so on and so forth. Um, we tend to work with solutions that fit within our core competencies, particularly around technology such as AI and blockchain and so on and so forth, um, which coincidentally are the ingredients that you need for the metaverse, which leads me to my second piece, right? We're living in a world today that's hyper accelerated because of AI. And from an investor perspective, you are in a very treacherous place in terms of determining where to invest, because everything is also getting repriced, right? And every new tech seems to be dwarfed by the next new thing that could come from nowhere the next day. Um, so Luminate is actually called Luminate because we're in many ways illuminating the path ahead for our founders, right? Because we truly believe that to be at the forefront, we have to be brave and embrace the rapidly changing landscape and be nimble enough to adapt to the situation at hand. So from my perspective, we have to stay small and nimble. We have to be okay with failing fast. We don't want to put all of our chips in one place. And we want to talk to as many people as possible and partner with as many people as possible, because we don't know where the path is going to take us, but we're going to try our best to see at least 5 to 10 steps ahead and all the possible opportunities. And as I'm speaking, I'm thinking, Stephen, that's probably what you do, except you do it 100 steps out as a futurist, right? So maybe I'm 10% of where you're looking at because you're looking so far out, right? But that's exactly what we're doing. And then at the same time, we're taking this mantra and then helping companies come into Thailand. We believe conversations and partnerships help us have a broad network feel for what's going on in the world, because there's so much going on.
So can you give us a use case of something, a project you worked on where you successfully executed and what the pain point was and how you addressed it?
Yeah, so we recently launched cloud gaming in Thailand with our partnership, uh, two strategic partnerships. One is with a company called Radiant Arc, recently acquired by Submare out of Spain, which is a data center infrastructure company. And on the other side of the equation is True. So True is the largest telco in Thailand. And in that equation, we have Radiant Arc investing in both the GPUs into the telco. That's what they do, putting GPUs in telco infrastructure, and bringing one of the first use cases, which is called gaming. So bringing that catalog of games also preloaded into the telcos. The net effect of what you have is you now have edge level GPU at local speeds, local sub 20 millisecond speeds available to the masses within Thailand. So the pain points, they're multiple, right? From a telco perspective, it's giving them a way to monetize their 5G infrastructure that they've spent heavily on. So rather than just being pipes for country level infrastructure, they can offer services that require that infrastructure and providing access to all, right, all the subscribers. The second pain point from a consumer standpoint is cloud gaming democratizes access to premium games, whereas before you would need to buy an Xbox or a PlayStation to play some of these games, or buy some expensive PC hardware to play some of these games. Now, if those games were run in cloud, you just need a dumb terminal that can stream content and can send back the interactivity from your phone back to the server. Like you want to move left, move right, shoot or jump. So we believe that this type of stuff, which coincidentally, many of those pieces are required for the metaverse of the future, right? When we talk about infrastructure being installed in telcos, acquiring users for a cloud gaming, which by the way could be the metaverse. All of these pieces are necessary ingredients for us to master and get really good at to prepare us for the next phase.
And so, has the service been launched yet, or and what was your
launched at the end of December, and full launch January.
and what expertise did you bring to the table in all of this?
Um, Across the board, I would say like we're somewhat of a Swiss Army knife, you know. I I've during my time at both Dell and my early days at Sonic, learned that when there are multiple parties at the table trying to deliver a solution, I was involved in launching the first Blu-ray devices in the PC space, and it seems like a very simple thing from a consumer perspective, but there's so much work that goes into that type of integration on a very new piece of tech. And the same is true even today, right? Like when we launch cloud gaming, does the market understand it? Do the data center people understand it? Do the telcos fully understand what's going on? Does Radiant Arc understand the telcos, particularly True in Thailand? So we find ourselves in a place where we're bridging everything from user acquisition to technology integration, both at the software level and at the hardware level data center, doing marketing, essentially anything that requires a successful launch, we play a part in. We don't shy away from no task is too small for us. We don't shy away from any of it.
Right. So you're really a solution in the box for hire,
Yes,
and you
yes,
don't
that's one
worry
way to
about,
put it.
yeah. So you're not worried about the complexity because you can do it all because you got so much talent in your team. Well,
Yeah, yeah. I think it's really the mentality and approach to problem solve, right? Because at the end of the day, all these are problems to solve. And being the first one in the room to admit that you may not have the answers to everything, I think is the first part of solving that problem, because then you know what resources you need to pull in to address the issue at hand.
so how do you scale your service? I mean, and do you go to the next mobile world and do a presentation? How do you get other telco? Because you got a model there, and how do you scale
Yeah,
that model to other sort of ecosystems, right?
yeah, yeah. Our partner, strategic partner Radiant, they're the driving force behind this particular offering. Um, for us, we look at scale a little bit differently. We don't. It's not simply just replicating this particular use case around the world. Uh, Radiant's already doing it, and we certainly are helping them do it as well. But for us, scale is leverage, is leveraging the things that we're doing today to pivot into other new areas, right? So it's not about doing more cloud gaming everywhere. It's to say that, okay, now that we have um, a GPU enabled cluster inside of the telco, what else can we do? What else can we do besides cloud gaming? And what other partnerships can we develop to build a broader ecosystem beyond cloud gaming? Right. And it's also revisiting some of the existing relationships that we have and see how we can plug that in. So a lot of what we do day in, day out is thinking about strategic opportunities based on the existing assets that we have. Luminate was pretty much born out of the necessity. You know, we we had to make that hard pivot from just doing R&D on metaverse towards a revenue generating business. And in order to do that, you have to look at the assets you have, right? Both people and physical assets, and say, okay, what can you make out of all the things that you have in hand to start generating solid revenue and positive cash flow. And then going from there, as you acquire more opportunities, then it's a reassessment of everything that you have situationally on the ground. Say, okay, now based on our expansion of our ecosystem because of successful partnerships, what else can we do? And we just keep going through that every week, every month, every quarter.
And do you use now in brainstorming other possibilities? So I've done 6 interviews today, right? And then a prior interview, I did an interview with L.R. Fox. Is just an amazing entrepreneur, very, very highly successful in all of the ventures he's created from a teenager, by the way. He created a venture as a teenager, successfully exited as a teenager. Um, Early into college, he created another venture, which is hugely successful. Just a series of just ventures and a very successful investor. And in the interview I did with him today, um, we talked about what does he look for when he invests, and he says, uh, and really, I encourage the audience because now I'm kind of paraphrasing him, and you should go directly to the interview, and the interview will be up within a few days. But you know, he doesn't like the word disruption. He thinks it's not a good descriptor. He kind of, because it's not about breaking or disrupting. It's about new kinds of things that and putting them into place, right? And that's what he's done successfully. New ways of doing things that didn't exist. And the way he frames it is that when he ideates, he thinks about what will be commonplace today or sorry, what will be commonplace in sometime in the future, let's say 5 or 3 years or 6 years in the future that doesn't exist today? And that's a lens that he uses, right? So,
Hmm.
so in other words, fusion would be one of those things. Doesn't exist today, but what would be commonplace, right? So that's an investable item. When he first got into drones, 15 years ago, it wasn't commonplace. And so he
Mm.
created some of the first drone companies, right? Because his vision is what will be commonplace, in the future, in the near future, the investable near future. And then what does he have to do to make that happen, right? And so it sounds like you're ideating in a way where, what will be commonplace in the future, but isn't necessarily commonplace today. So that use case of the cloud gaming will be something that wasn't commonplace in Thailand, and now you're making it commonplace, right? So he's constantly thinking in this way. And in fact, I should do an introduction because of
Mm.
the kinds of things you're trying to do. And because he's been just a really enormously successful investor, just thinking this way
Mm.
and investing in things before they happen, right? And catching it. And then they just explode, right? They just become huge ventures and things like that. And so in your brainstorming that you're constantly doing, how does that occur? How do you ideate and using kind of his framework, something that isn't commonplace today, but will be commonplace? And then how can you move the needle to make sure you're part of that journey to make that happen, right?
Yeah. We don't we don't have a we don't have a fixed framework on this one. I would say maybe more like guiding principles we do have. Um, One purely is just focusing on networking and partnerships, and not being biased towards any specific types of industries, because you'd be surprised at how much synergy you can have sometimes with the least expected of connection points. Um, and for me, uh, the the best partnerships are the ones that not only grow vertically, but they grow horizontally, right? So maybe you started off doing one thing, and then it broadens into a multitude of working together on many different types of functions or projects. Um, and it is also the effort around piecing together the strengths and core competencies of different larger organizations, and then creating something even more powerful beyond that. Right. I guess in the business circles, it's about finding win-win situations all the time. Um, for me, I look at it as creating leverage. How do you take A plus B and then create something with C in a very innovative way that kind of skirts around traditional thinking? But this is easier said than done, because I do feel that being in corporate America, I'm one myself, right? Is that sometimes you're so fixed in your box that it's hard for you to take the blinders off to see what's out there, or to stare at the obvious that's staring at you, but you don't see it because you're so traditional in the way, like, oh, I'm marketing, so I only look at things in a certain way. But the toughest part that we do day in, day out is removing those assumptions. We have to continuously, like myself and my team, we continuously have to force ourselves to um, uh, uh, remove our traditional in our experiences in the past. And not to say that those experiences are bad, it's just that we can't have those experiences limit our thinking of what's possible.
So to assist in that, then because you have access to these GPUs, um, I assume you have, fairly ready access to the GPUs. You have access to a telco and their resources and things like that. You've already created value to them. Then why not create a harness? A harness is sort of like this. It's like your assembler language coding that you done, but it's for an LLM. And you may have heard a major um, AI company, the harness for one of their products got leaked, and of course now they're clamping it down because the harness is really directing how that LLM is going to work, right? Why not
Mm.
create a harness to do this kind of cross-functional partner ideation, cross-linking value opportunities? And the more you seed it with what you like, you could seed it with the work you did with True and with this data center provider and the GPU access, but seed it with this kind of transformational thinking and create the sort of the language that to get the LLMs to work in your favor. Have you explored that? I think your team has explored just looking at it in a sandbox, OpenClaw, and what it can do and things like that. But as these LLMs become more capable, or even these world foundation models become more capable, leveraging some of the capability you have to help in your ideation and connecting the dots in some way, but still you're human in the loop. So the combination of the two will generate more possibilities. Have you explored any of that at all? Or?
Yeah, we have looked at we've looked at the possibility of um, a deal flow engine or framework. Um, as far as inputting in opportunities and then to quickly assess both risk and commercial viability. All right, we've
Yeah.
looked at those things.
But even generate new possibilities that you haven't even considered, right?
Yeah, that would be new. Yeah, we haven't done that extra, haven't gone that extra step in terms of okay, well then where's the leverage point? Because we're still relied on our excellent ingenuity to do that. I'm kidding. Go ahead.
You know, I mean, the possibilities are endless, right? Because I know some of
Hmm.
your team, and they're just phenomenal. They're phenomenal. The world class phenomenal. You're world class phenomenal, and your teammates are world class phenomenal. And there isn't anything that, I mean, it's unbounded what you can, the solutions, the capabilities you can bring, right? So I guess letting the
Yeah,
world
yeah.
know.
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. I would say that um no, we haven't formalized anything like that. I think trying to explore and ideate with an LLM on the possibilities that certainly has been done before. But to do that at a enterprise level, we have not attempted that. No. When I say enterprise, I mean like a very repeatable process that you understand what the guardrails are um, and how to input into the system and what to get out of the system in a repeatable manner. We haven't done that yet, for sure. Um, but certainly, I think we're in that position where it would be interesting to attempt something like this.
Yeah, or even looking at NemoClaw, right? So Jensen
Mm.
reacted to all of this excitement over OpenClaw.
Hmm.
So he created a version or layers on top of it to make it safer, right? And in fact,
Hmm.
that's probably why Peter, who created OpenClaw, agreed to put it under a foundation of OpenAI so that there's some kind of a structure to protect it, right? Or to try to safeguard it.
Hmm.
But you have so
Hmm.
much talent, human talent. And because I work with AI every day, but it's still human talent, I always have to be in that loop. And the combination of your team, I mean, it's just
Mm.
unbounded, right? So, um, are you able to maybe showcase some areas that you're exploring now that you think are good potentials for Lumen 8 and what you want to do at all, or is it
For us, let me think about this one real quick. I would say, uh, again, I'll caveat this with like we don't really have a very big team. We're less than 30 people, and most of it is engineering, product development engineering. Um, we're very much now spending most of our time on building accretive partnerships. So trying to figure out the leverage points of where we can scale to something bigger. Um, uh, I can't go into too much details on that front because there's still a lot of sensitive conversations that are taking place there. But more on the practical side in terms of what we're building, um, we are doing a lot of work on the gamification space. I think the world, because of the way social media has really entrenched into the fabric of society, and people um, needing that some level of engagement. I think gamification has been on the forefront of for a lot of um, products and offerings, brands wanting to learn a different way in how to engage in consumers as the demographics shift, right? More towards Gen Z, Gen Alpha. So we're spending a lot of time in gamification. And then we're also spending a lot of time on the AI front in terms of solving today's pain points, right? Like we all know what we can do individually when we interact, when we use our favorite subscription like in Claude, OpenAI, or Gemini. But there are enterprise level use cases around education and creativity tools where they need a consistent and robust pipeline to be able to uh, let's say deploy to their broader community where they can almost anticipate the output based on the input that's going in. So, for example, if you wanted to create a framework around generating um, videos that have a consistent character throughout the entire process for an entire set of curriculum that's maybe 12 hours long, how do you ensure that consistency? Those are the types of problems that we focus on. And then we focus on the problem, we build a framework, and then we get it to production live for our customers, right? So we're trying to learn these things well, and at the same time maintaining a level of agnostic attitude because we know that the space will change and evolve very quickly. New tech will come in, new LMs will come in, someone will come with next big thing, and we have to be ready to replace and move on.
is there any comments, anything you want to spotlight um, within DTGO or MQDC or TMB Media Global? Anything that you want to sort of spotlight for our audience?
Yeah, I think on those three fronts, right? Maybe I'll start with TNB first. So TNB, Dr. Tan is the founder, Quinn B is the founder as well. Focus on next generational entertainment content, but with a layer of technology behind it. Is really trying to break out, leveraging the creative capital of Thailand. Thailand's amazing, amazingly beautiful country. Um, Ton of creative talent. Probably not always well known around the world, but so much of the world's content comes from uh, the creative prowess of Thai. And I learned this a while back, like 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. I learned that many of the probably most of the Hollywood posters at that time, when you go to a theater and you're watching, you see all these posters on the walls, they're all produced by artists in Thailand. So Hollywood was already working with Thai artists to do all those things, right? I had no idea. Um, so that's TMB Media Global. And then on MQDC side, which is uh, real estate company doesn't really do it justice. It's a it's a ecosystem that uses real estate to showcase next generational living for the future. If we were to anticipate what society needs, not only today, but 5, 10 years from now, what should living look like, right? And Quimby or Quintipa Porn embodies a lot of her passionate ideas around these concepts of being close to nature, uh, building in a sustainable way, and even after building it, the properties should be focused on sustainability. Um, and then I think probably one of the most impressive things is multi-generational living because the two prior ones are rather obvious, right? People want to live closer to nature, okay, plant more trees or build closer to mountains or whatever, natural resources. Um, Sustainability, yes, you can be eco-friendly. That's easy to do as well. But to think of things like, okay, we want to support multi-generational living. Mauritius is a showcase of that, right? You have everything from supporting singles to young families, all the way to retired living on one ecosystem, with the full intent that everyone wants to be close to their loved ones, right? And that's embodied in a project, and this core theme of a project, which I feel is rather unique. There are many other projects under MQDC, I think, that are amazing in that same vein, maybe for another time. And then DTGO, uh, came into existence first and foremost. It was the very first entity that came into existence for Miss Tipaporn, and its roots are being the foundation that supports those that need help the most, right? So corporate giving, 2% of top line revenue back to supporting feeding the hungry, providing educational access, providing hospital medical access, and all member companies within the DTGO group, including MQDC, abide by the 2% top line. Right? So I think amazing institutions that are built to not only serve people, but serve society, and not just in Thailand. We look at it as a platform of change for the world as well.
So, do you see the ability for that model to be scaled in other areas where, um, MQDC, DTGO are participants in that scaling in different parts of the world? Because you've got a proven ecosystem, proven research, even the wellness. There's a wellness center in Forestias that's world class.
Hmm.
And in fact, the team has searched worldwide for the top researchers in wellness, in translational work. In other words, practical solutions that can be used for wellness and things like that. So taking all that expertise and transplanting that in other parts of the world. So that's kind of one area. The other area is Cloud 11. And can you describe Cloud 11?
Yeah, Cloud 11. So address your questions separately. So Cloud 11 is the preeminent creative hub for Southeast Asia and probably for all of Asia. 285,000 square meters of space, focused entirely on fostering creativity for those around, and then those that come. And specifically, it has um, creative studio spaces, spaces for training seminars, venues to showcase work, both galleries and event halls and spaces, and then green spaces to inspire the creative process as well. Um, it is both retail, commercial, and hospitality on one place. Um, and there's really nothing quite like it. I was just there actually yesterday, and at the mezzanine level, it's just a sight to see. Like it's nothing incredibly fancy uh or grand, but it's serene and large. It almost reminds you that nothing is impossible. And that's really the type of confidence you want to inspire in a creator that comes in and try to do something. But I'd say the most important thing that Cloud 11 does um, is democratizing to access to creativity. Because a lot, like in today's world, particularly with digital access, you know, sometimes you need heavy lifting tools to do the work, and not every creator can afford that, nor can they afford the network of people that can help them achieve something they want to do, like producing a film, producing music, and so on and so forth. So Call 11 aims to democratize access without you having to invest that heavy capital and equipment, because now you can timeshare that equipment of others, right? Um, because it's somewhat like a WeWork for creators. You will now be put in access with not only preeminent studios that are in that space or publishers, but also other creators that are like yourself that maybe you want to team up with. Um, and above and beyond that, it's getting the people who have succeeded already to come in and help those that are aspiring, right, to reach out and grow up. So that to me is the embodiment of what Cloud 11 represents to the creative economy. Um, as far as your second question about the ability for the the various concepts that MQDC has invested in, whether or not they get to be scaled around the world, I think that's actually the full intent. When we look at Cloud 11, as I just described it, it doesn't have to be always a 285,000 square meter space. But the core concept of what it's trying to do, right? Democratizing access to the creative economy can manifest itself in so many different ways around the world. So we look at it more as a platform. Its physical representation in Thailand is that physical space, but we're also working on a digital manifestation of it, which is enabling creators to engage not only physically in the space, but digitally as well, right? So when someone produces something and they want to find ways to monetize it beyond the traditional rails of publishing on Spotify or Apple Music, what if they could put that music on chain and set their own business terms on how they want their community to engage with that music? These are new and innovative ways to engage and potentially create new revenue streams for creators. And that concept by itself is doesn't need to be at a specific location. It's really borderless. Same thing for Freshes, right? The core concept is ecosystem living, wellness, multi-generational living. I think these are core concepts that many societies around the world are contemplating as well. As the population ages, as people realize that nuclear families have distanced themselves from, like, physically, right, from the parents, because the parents live in a different location. How do you bring everyone back closer together, right, to not only create a healthy connection and bond, but also a shared wellness economy?
That's a really elegant way of describing all of the creativity and the investment and the transformational innovation that is tops in the world. I mean, I travel a lot and I see a lot. It is the best I've ever seen in my life. Nothing can match it. It is the best. The best team, the best innovation, the best realization of investment, and just really remarkable what you and your colleagues
Thank you,
and
Stephen.
founders have done. And we're down to 2 hours actually. So we're down to the last question. The last question is, what recommendation and questions do you want to leave the audience?
Um, Maybe less so questions. I wasn't actually expecting this one. I would say maybe just a reflection, right? Because I would say that um, uh, all of us are placed in our circumstances, or most likely not by choice, um, but we do have a responsibility to maximize not only our opportunities that are afforded to us, but also an responsibility to help others that may be less fortunate as well. Um, it's not necessarily leave no man behind, but it's certainly that anything that has been given to you to get you to your circumstance today, try to make it available to someone else that you know. Um, I try to do that these days as well. And it may not sound very strategic, um, but I do feel very strongly about it. I think the world is moving at such a fast pace that the gap is widening rapidly, right, between those that have it and those that have not. And if we don't try to help as many people as we can, I don't know what's going to happen. Right. So I'll just kind of leave it at that.
There's these lights, the world, and really lights in sort of the broader ecosystem of the universe. And the work that's being done by yourself and your colleagues and the founders are lights for the future. It's lights for the present. And really, it's global mentorship. And it's a template that all of the world should follow. So James, you got a long day ahead. So thank you for taking the time and getting up early to spend a couple hours with me and describing your remarkable journey of contribution and accomplishment and continuing to do so and really having a global impact. And blessings to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for your time as well. It's very nice talking to you for a couple hours this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.